Well, I think we could take a little time to go over the grant awardee obligations. That was scheduled for first thing after lunch, but the good news is that we'll get out of the way for this and you'll have that much more time to hear from DNR and SHPO, because I think that's probably what you're most excited to hear about. So also when you came in, there was a FY 2026 grant awardee obligation handout. So if you don't have that, we can get you some. This applies to grant awardees moving forward from FY 26 on. So any of you who are required to be here today, this is one of the things that we wanted to talk with you about. I'm sure you noticed this morning that there's GMPT, there's GMRPTC, there's the Greater Minnesota, or there's the PTLAC. So all of those sorts of things get, I think, confused for people. Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission is the body that does granting for the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund. GMPT is a Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails. They're our sister organization, and they are a membership organization. So just a plug for that. If you are not a member of GMPT, please see Gina or myself, and we can hook you up with a way to become a member. It's important because GMRPTC cannot do lobbying activities on our own at the Minnesota legislature. And while we haven't had any issues the last couple of years, it's always good to have someone monitoring those for us. I'm certainly there a lot during the session, but I am not a lobbyist. I am an advocate. So there's a fine line there. So GMPT is the organization that will take membership dollars, pay the lobbyists, and they do fabulous forums and many other educational outreach during the year, as well as membership meetings. So I'd highly encourage you to think about joining that organization if you haven't. And then there's the PTLAC, which is the Parks and Trails Legacy Advisory Committee. And that was formed when the funds came into being, and that was one of the statutory requirements, was to have a committee advising the Parks and Trails partners, which are Greater Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and Metropolitan Regional Parks. And of that fund, 40% goes to DNR, 40% goes to Metropolitan Council, and 20% flows to Greater Minnesota. So we want to ensure that that funding formula stays in place. Believe it or not, that 25 years will be up in just a few more years. 2034, we'll need to be renewing the legacy amendment that funds the great projects that are happening across the state in all the systems. So anyways, the grant awardee obligations came about because sometimes there's confusion as to where these funds are coming from. Our partners at DNR, Jenny and Sarah, are awesome. They're amazing, and you've worked with them. And if you haven't, you will be. They keep all the balls in the air, and they manage the money. So the money flows through the DNR, but the grants are awarded from GMRPTC. And for those of you that have in the past gotten a grant, currently gotten a grant, or thinking about applying for a grant, that's a process that's not the most difficult to apply for, but we want to make certain, of course, at all times that projects are ready to go. So sometimes at the end of that, there's confusion as to where the funds came from. We just want to remind everyone that those funds do come from the 20% share that Greater Minnesota has. So our awardee obligations are simply to make sure that Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission name is circulated. Remember that back in 2008, the Legacy Amendment was passed overwhelmingly. It's coming up for renewal again. And we want to make sure that the 20% that we have available for Greater Minnesota continues, that the name of Greater Minnesota doesn't get lost in all of the notifications, the reminders, what's happening. So along with that, we've come up with some guidelines that we'd like you to follow, specifically acknowledging that the grant came from Greater Minnesota. And thanks for many of you that have been awarded grants in this round. There were some wonderful press releases that went out. So again, that's getting the Greater Minnesota name out there. It's really important. We also want to make sure that the Legacy Amendment beautiful logo is noted. You have to do that anyways. It's in your DNR contract. But along with that, we have these signs that have our logo on them. These are available and required to be put up in your parks if you're designated in our system. They're free. I think we've gotten to most of you in this room to give you these signages for your parks. If we have, and your trails, if we haven't, we have some here today and we'd love to give them to you so you can put them up so that when people are using your facility, they're recognizing that the funding flowed through that wonderful Clean Water, Land and Legacy Amendment and further flowed from Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails Commission. So these are available and we want you to put them up in your parks. Just a couple other things too that are important, and that's the rapid response to the annual check-in that you get from DNR. For those of you that have current grants, active current grants, you've gotten an email from Jenny or Sarah already this year saying, hey, how's it going? Here's some questions. Please tell us how you're doing and let us know if there's any issues. We want to make sure that those responses come back quickly because it's required for the DNR to do those check-ins, and thus it's required for all of you to respond to those check-ins. That's really important. It's where we know if something's taking longer because we're shared that information. So if by some chance your grant for some reason or another is taking longer to complete, we know that we can make action to ensure that that grant can be extended. Which takes legislative action. So right now in this session, we're introducing a bill for 5 of our facilities that have just gotten a little behind due to a number of different factors and extending those grants for 2 years. It isn't something the DNR can just wave a magic wand and do, nor can we. It needs to go through the legislature. And one of the ways that we know that's happening is if you do those responses to Jenny and Sarah. We also want to make sure that when you're working on your projects, you're sharing photos with us and letting us know how that's happening. You've seen our report. Our annual policy and planning report is due to the legislature on January 15th every year. And one of our biggest problems doing the report is getting great photos of people using the facilities. They don't have to be built yet. We'd love to see your facilities in progress of being built. We sure want to see them with people in them. Sometimes Joe and I are there taking great pictures of things, but there's nobody using them. And that's not the best portrayal of what our facilities are. So we'd like you to share those photos of your work in progress with us so that we've got great photos for our report every year. We can update our website and we can show people what's happening in Greater Minnesota Parks and Trails. As well, along with that, we've seen a lot of retirements the last couple of years, and I'm really resentful of that because we get to know people, we get attached to you, and then you retire, and that's really upsetting, particularly when you're going, we're not. But when you are doing a transfer of personnel in your offices, please be sure to go into your database and update the information so that we know who to send those reports to, so that we know how to be in contact with people and who our contacts are. Sometimes that gets lost. So we want to make sure that you're going into your funding portals, your master plan portals, your designation portals, and updating information as things change so that we know who we're working with now. So that's our obligations. When you do take the grant, that's one of the very few things we're going to ask of you. So do take this with you, and if you have any questions about it, you can grab Joe or I. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. It's new this year, and it's primarily because we do want to make sure that Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails Commission is seen by people using those parks so that, again, when that renewal comes up in the not too distant future, we are part of the Parks and Trails Legacy Fund because it certainly has been a benefit and a huge bonus for us in Greater Minnesota. So that's it. It looks like lunch is just about ready out there. Any questions before we break for lunch? Yes.
Are you aware of any organization or coordination that's going on now that is going to be helpful toward renewal that's coming up in 10 years of the legacy grant?
You know, that's an interesting question. And if you saw the Environmental Natural Resources Trust Fund renewal, it seemed like nothing was happening about that. And then suddenly you heard a lot about it or something about it, and it was renewed overwhelmingly again. We've been talking about that as a group in the Parks and Trails Legacy Advisory Committee, and certainly the commissioners have been talking about it. And there's a fine line. Do we start talking about it now and promoting it? It's a few years out. I suspect that what's going to happen is probably 18 months out from the renewal, you're going to hear a lot about it. Now, DNR cannot lobby for that. State agencies can't. We can. Certainly our partners at GMPT can, and they'll have to lead that charge. So yes, there will, to your question, we're not doing a lot right now. We're talking in groups like this about the renewal coming up. It's going to start snowballing in coming years, but do think about joining GMPT and helping that effort, because we're going to need everybody's support to do that. You know, you think it's pretty much a no-brainer, and you know, it could be. I don't know how many people in this room remember if you voted for it. I don't necessarily remember, but I don't think I would have voted against it. So it's just important to talk to people about what it's done for all of us.
I just want to add on that, that one of our key focus and why we work so hard on planning and getting good projects is so that we have those great stories to tell about what a success legacy has been when it comes to the renewal. So the work that all of you are doing to put good pavement on the ground, put great playgrounds in place, building fantastic, memorable campgrounds, those are the stories, those are the pictures, those are the user numbers that we're going to be using to sell that legacy story when it comes time for renewal in 8 or 9 years. So keep that in mind, thinking about your projects. It really comes down to how much have you accomplished, how much have you impacted people's lives in your community as to how much they're going to want to support the renewal of legacy. So that's something we think about quite often when it comes to that. So any other questions? All right. Since there's so many planning questions coming up, just from the commission standpoint, thinking about master plans, a new facility or a new area of a facility, it's not in our content standards because those were last written in 2021 before we met these wonderful people. But I would strongly recommend at least take a look at the maps when you're developing sort of the natural resource component or some of those background information components of your master plan. So you've got an idea if there may be something tripping any of these triggers, anything on the maps that shows you may have some things to look at further. So you at least have an idea there. When it comes to the projects, you know, for those of you who've been doing this a while, the process has traditionally been come for funding from the commission with your schematic design. And if we fund you, then you start the process of going through the archaeological work. We realize how tight that could sometimes be, or sometimes something comes up and you have to, like was mentioned, change something around significantly. That's where our new grant came in so that you could do that work before you even came in for funding. So ideally, our environmental and archaeological grant is we're planning in a project in a couple of years. We're not ready for funding yet, but we've got enough scope down where we can do this study right now of phase 1 or whatever might be needed so that we can be ready to go once we do get that funding. That's what our grant is really for. It could go towards larger planning in some cases, but it's really geared towards getting you over the finish line so that project can move forward quickly once you do get funding. So hopefully that answers a couple of those questions for you.
Hey, Joe, can you elaborate on the grant? Is there like a minimum or maximum dollar amount, or is there a shared cost? Or?
We don't have I don't think we didn't have no minimum. We do require a 20% match. Well, $50,000 maximum, that's what it was. That comes open as we have funding for it. So it's right now we've got a little bit of funding in the pot yet for it. Hopefully more coming in soon. So be talking to us if you do have something you're thinking about. It's open on a recurring basis, just as we have funding available. There's no firm deadline. We just
a $50,000 maximum grant amount. Your study will cost more than that. But our award is 50 up to 50 with a 20% match.
How much do you get each year? I know it's going to change, but are you talking like $100 grand, a million?
Our first round this past year was $100,000. We funded 2 grants out of that, and we've got a little bit left. Hopefully we can put a little bit more into that this year. Great question.
So if you are fortunate enough to have funds left over when you've done your project, and we've seen that happen more than you might think, you can put in a project scope change. So, as long as it's somehow tied to your project, we can do a scope change on that. And that means that we take the information, take it back to the commission, and they approve a project scope change. We don't want funds left over at the end of a project because it does not come back to the commission. It starts at the top of the fund and trickles down. So if you have $10,000 left by the time it gets back down to us, it's a very small amount. So we'd rather see you use it in a responsible way that complements your project. For instance, we had a trail project recently that had funds left over, believe it or not. They did project scope change to add amenities to that trail. So waste receptacles, dog stations, bike repair stations, benches, that sort of thing. So we'll work with you to come up with something where you can use those funds. But we do need to know about it.
Can you repeat your first question?
So the ballot item in November on whether that affected any of what's going on with your funding mechanisms.
The lottery money.
The lottery.
The lottery money?
That doesn't affect anything from us. That continues and there's some different uses for it, but that does not affect the commission. We have a small percentage that we just carved out in the last biennium that adds about $1 million to our grant fund. But the vast majority of that did not affect us.
Okay.
All right, we got just a few things yet we want to cover from the GMRPT side of things. We're actually going to cover those before we got into the other presentations, but quite frankly, they're better. So we just want to make sure we got that done with plenty of time. All right, so this is actually what we covered. Everything that is on this list was already covered by SHPO and DNR folks. If you've completed our application before, it's all the checklist of things that are included in our little pre-contract checklist. So this was just a little bit of a preview of what we were going to be going through. So for our next grant cycle, we do want to let you know about this, since I think that's what a lot of you are here for is, okay, we're getting ready for funding this next year. What does the application timeline and information look like? Our applications for development and connecting people to the outdoors project are traditional funding cycle, open on April 1st. They close on July 31st. I already checked the dates. So we will be good to go. Everything will be open by then. And you should know that our updated guidance will be available on the website by late March. So keep an eye out. The information that's on our website now is still very good and useful, but there may be updates that will be on there, including our tutorial video that will explain all the changes for this year as well, whatever those turn out to be. We're still working through those. As we discussed earlier today, we have the new environmental and archaeological grant applications. Those are being accepted on an ongoing cycle. We have a little bit of funding left. We'll have more dollars available for it fairly soon. As we talked about earlier, that is a $50,000 grant opportunity. I'd ask for up to $50,000. The required 20% minimum match. Even if you come in under 50,000, we still want a 20% match. Those are to get you going on your project. So if you're thinking you're going to be coming in a couple of years with the project and you think you're going to need some environmental or archaeological type work, be in touch with us, start figuring out how much it might cost you and apply for those funds, that grant, to help get that done beforehand. So once you do get our funding, we're just trying to make it a little bit easier and without all the headaches that cause the problems that everybody else was talking about today with delays and everything else. So that's really the purpose of it. And it helps you with your resources a little bit more. Ross.
What's the typical time frame for turnaround?
If we have the funding in place, it will usually be, if you give it to me at least a couple of weeks before our commission meeting, we'll talk about it at that month's commission meeting. And so far we've been good to go when we've gotten that to approve the funding that month. And then it's just a matter of getting through whatever contracting we need to through DNR. Great question. Anything else on that particular grant? All right, so if you have any questions, just get in touch with us and we'll help you through that. As we talked about earlier, through our first session before lunch today, we are looking to have a new accessibility grant application. Guidelines will be available for that this spring as well, once we determine that we've got some funding available for it. This is gonna be typically your smaller projects will have a smaller pot of funding. This is not like the larger application for development or connecting people to the outdoors. This is, we need to fix some ramps, we need to fix some doorways, we need to do little things, put some new picnic tables in that make a picnic shelter accessible. Those sorts of things that can help make your facility meet guidance and requirements a little bit better or go beyond those guidance. We really want to emphasize this. This is something that can be a help for people. It doesn't mean that when you're doing a traditional development project that you shouldn't be incorporating all that into your overall project as well. Remember, when you're doing a larger funded project, all those components that are included in that area now need to be ADA accessible. So that needs to be a part of your project as well for a larger one. This is just to help you get through in the interim in a lot of cases, or fix some older issues that may have been lingering out there, but you're not looking at a project anytime soon. So in most cases.
So does the
But
Does the commission then be the holder of the grant money, or does that go through a DNR
Those are
contract?
that'll go through the DNR as well. Yes,
We are not our own fiscal agent.
we don't get direct checks, so.
Jenny?
Yes.
I was just gonna add that, so for the environmental and archaeological, a lot of those like contract requirements will not be applicable because there's no development. So it's a much quicker grant contract process.
Good. Any other questions on those two? Yes.
I think I only have one. The accessibility grant, that is only for regional parks, it's not like for local city parks, correct?
That's correct. Everything we do, it has to be regionally designated before we can fund it. So. Except for maybe a little bit of CPO that happens to bleed out into other area parks from time to time, connecting people to the outdoors programming. Yes, one thing we do want to mention, we talked earlier about Bill Botten being available to help with some consultations. If you want to work with us to take a look at your regional facility with Bill, let us know. We want to start developing a list of things that we might be able to work together to do some assessments on. And of course, anything that we work through that assessment on may have a leg up. We don't know this for sure yet. Nothing's official, but certainly couldn't help with the accessibility grant, whether you would be eligible or a priority for that if you work through some of those assessments with our team beforehand, or your own consultants too. All right. Like I said before, all of our application guidance will be updated on the website by late March before the April 1st deadline. And a reminder that all of these grants are completed using the same application form on our website. So it's really important, as we talked about earlier with our new grant award agreement that Renee talked about, keep us in the loop. If you have staffing changes, new people coming in, if you happen to be the one leaving, let us know at least, even if you don't know who the new person coming in is. Because we're going to have to keep track of that to make sure that everybody can keep their access to the online portal. And if you happen to walk into a situation where you can't access that information, just get in touch with us and we'll help you figure out how do we get back into the portal. So, all right. We did that. And we're going to go through all that. All right.
Hey, Joe, you said that the guidance documents are updated. Did all of them get a revision, or are some of them still a year, 2 or 3 old?
They will be updated on the website by before that April 1st deadline for sure, hopefully by mid-March. It'll say right on there whether they're updated or new, or if it doesn't say updated or new, they still apply. They're just the old version. Any other questions? All right. We wanted to leave some time at the end of the day here so that all of us who are staff can spend some time answering questions. I know over lunch or break, we're gonna get lots of them. which is a lot of fun for us, quite honestly, because then we can start thinking about what other issues can we try and tackle. But we're here, going to be here for a little while yet. And Renee, do you have anything you want to say?
I don't think so. You've heard us talk long enough. We do have Kelly, Sarah, and Jenny available. So please ask them one-on-one questions. This is meant to be a really interactive day and give you all the tools you need to be successful in future grants and also move along those of you who have an FY26 grant as well. So this, again, is moving through the legislature right now, the FY26. We don't expect any problems, but we're always prepared for them. So cross your fingers, and if you currently have a grant going in recommendation in FY26, as soon as we have that bill number for the grant, the bill number for that particular bill in the House and Senate, we will let you know, so you can talk to your local legislators and ask them to support that. It's very important that we do have that local support. It's funny how some folks don't support legacy and some do. So we want to make sure that if you have a project that we have recommended, you are talking with your local legislative delegation so that they know what's important to their district and they should vote in support of that. Thanks for being here.
Thank you again. And for those who are visiting online, joining us, we really appreciate you doing that. Feel free to give us a call as well if you have any questions anytime. So thank you all. Have a great day. If there's any leftovers out there, please take some. All right. Thank you.